Hello!
Hi!
Here we are.
I don't know, I think this is episode 18. We're back in school and after Thanksgiving break, and this week we want to talk about
Interdisciplinary CIA.
Yeah. So what is CIA?
Curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So what are the ways in which you can be interdisciplinary in those three areas?
Okay.
Yep.
And by interdisciplinary, we mean using another discipline in your discipline.
There you go.
So, for example, in this one,
Art.
Art and science.
And art and history.
History.
Okay?
Okay.
So we're not going to say anything besides the fact that we used art for a different reason.
In our classrooms.
Yeah.
So watch this, and then we'll be back, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. What do you got? Tell me about what you did.
Well, we're watercoloring right now, and we're watercoloring sand dollars, or at least some of us are. And so I had two different perspectives.
So what value does this have in journaling? Tell me more about that.
Well, it is a form of documentation of literal
Collecting data.
Yeah, these are our details that we are observing. But for me personally, I do watercoloring outside of class, and I think it kind of puts an emotion in it.
Yeah, now check that out.
So add some more yellow
That's pretty cool.
to give it some more
I
depth.
like it. So what did you think about doing that? Was that kind of terrifying, or?
Yeah, because you think like grass is just green, but
Yeah.
it has like, and I also added blue. You can see blue behind here because the blue makes it a little bit darker because I was having trouble with that. Because if you add just one shade of green, it's just a flat tone of just light green. But if you add yellow and blue, it gives more dimension.
But you just discovered it by just trying it out. Okay, cool. Well done.
When I first did it, it was like all following the lines, and it almost looked like too perfect.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go with a little bit darker green, and then just like push the lines.
Right.
And so it looked a little more sporadic and more realistic.
So allowing watercolors to be forgiving,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
just
exactly.
to roll with it.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that you're varying your brush strokes to get different textures.
Yeah,
It's great.
I'm trying to.
And you're just experimenting with a lot of colors there, and that's great. Blue, I was like, oh, and then I like spilled water on it. And then I just kept working on it. So I spilled water on it, and then I started dabbing it off with my paintbrush, and it turned out really cool.
I like how you curved the road.
How you use the sky, because I mean up there we have some clouds, but you didn't fully fill in the sky. Which
Excuse me, sir.
looks
I'm
very
using
intentional.
Why do we like to watercolor?
Artists that should have done you can go first.
Because it is relaxing.
And why is it relaxing for you?
Because if I make a mistake, then I can just,
It's no big deal.
yeah.
It's a forgiving medium, right?
I like watercolor because it teaches me to let go of perfection and just letting the brush dictate the naturalness that only God can create.
You get a sticker today, girl! Here we are. This is our first attempt to journal through watercoloring. I like your use of trying to get different colors of green.
Thank you.
What you gonna add, Matthew? Don't worry about being wrong. Just roll with it.
I know I made it too dark. I'm trying to blend it out.
Don't sweat it. It's changing as we sit here, right? So don't worry about it.
So I had black on it, and I moved my thing, and it splattered.
Oh, I still struggle with that. I want it all to be all like perfect and not watercolory.
I like it watercoloring.
Beautiful. How you doing?
Terrible. This is hard.
Stop! Oh, it looks great! I love it!
No, this is.
Nope. Don't put contempt on your work. It's awesome. Remember, this is like, you don't do this often. We need to practice it more often.
Yeah, this is hard.
But I like the textures that you have.
I try like.
Okay, but look also the consistency. You were trying to do the same type of flower the same way. I think that's actually pretty remarkable. Okay, so no, you're doing great. Doing great. Oh, great detail. So what do you like about the brush so far? You can do detail like that versus brush strokes.
Actually, yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's a little different. I have never used brushes like this.
Neither have I, but they're very nice.
Did you do one yet, Avery?
I'm on my third attempt. Trying to find the right color of these leaves.
I did that a little bit earlier. It's like, okay, this is a very different palette than I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
So
I'm very nervous.
remember, it's forgiving. Relax and see what happens.
It's my
Mrs. Priggy's giving it a try.
Paid to paint. I love it.
best job ever. Okay, so when I was thinking about what I wanted to paint about, I was thinking about what it would be like to be one of these people, and I thought, like, they're just picked up by their own people from their lives that they're living and shoved on this boat, and I think about how that can change their heart and change their perspective on life. And I think that before they were smushed onto this boat, or before they were even captured and to be slaves by their own people, they were living their life, and they had these hearts maybe for God, or they just had this joy of life. And so that's kind of what this red represents. But then the black on top of the red, that is then spreading out to the other people and overtaking everything, is their hearts being hardened and the darkness of this life that they've been shoved into, and how it's kind of contagious.
So this is my my depiction of a colored person who I chose not to draw in brown, because there's a lot more that's there, and a lot more that people in that time didn't see. They just thought they were dull and they weren't useful for anything, but there's so much life and so much rich history there that I felt like it needed to be incorporated. But with the simplicity of the picture, I felt like I could only do that in color. Now, my colored person is laying on the bottom of the ocean after being thrown from a slave trade ship, and I drew the facial expression so that they weren't in agony or pain. They're peaceful, they're resting, like at the bottom of the ocean, unfortunately. But the reason they're at the bottom of the ocean and they're peaceful is because under all that stress and pressure, which is symbolized by the water and the weight that's pressing down on top of them, at least they can find some peace in death.
Awesome.
Okay, so why don't you talk about how you used art in your classroom for science?
So we ran across someone this summer on the, if you've been following us, that summer girls trip thing that we did.
Yep.
And there was someone we observed who was using watercolors as a means to journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, because my first lesson out the box is, how do you see? What does it mean to see? Mm-hmm. So often we're like, pretty flower, and you move on, but you don't take note of the intricacies, and all those intricacies matter, and where they are matters, and so on. So we talk a lot about seeing, and I thought, what a great way to teach kids how to see, because I do writing and sketching, but to add watercolor journaling, I thought was an amazing way to do it. So I used it for two reasons. One was an object lesson on how to see, but also use it as a means of a formative assessment. How are you seeing? What are you seeing? And but also giving them the chance to fail.
Yeah, break that down. How are you using watercoloring as a method of having the students be able to formatively assess themselves?
Wow, right? So yeah, so what are you trying to paint there? Why are you trying to paint that? How can you improve on that? What would make it better? What color choice could you use? But even try not to give that away. Like, what could you do to improve it? Let them come up. Well, color could be better, light source could be better, brush stroke. So, but not giving that away to them.
Well, and what I was seeing is that they were not doing well, or at least in their eyes, they weren't doing well the first time. And then you'd say, that's okay. Try it again. Right? Or try it this way. And that's what formative assessments are. Those are those intermediary assessments where we can check, and the students can check to see, like, am I getting this? Am I doing, or am I on the path that I want to be on?
Exactly.
Or do I need to go back
Exactly.
And
then when it got really cool, I didn't even really realize it until I rewatched the video with you, that the kids were assessing each other. I forgot.
Yeah.
I had totally forgotten that I had them do that. And to watch how the quality of what they were saying to each other, I thought was an important aha. And I think we want to come back later and do an episode on student peer-to-peer assessments and reflections, and how powerful that is.
But even more simple, probably for most of us to wrap our heads around, is how you used art for the students to recognize the botany and the flora.
Yeah, absolutely. And the arrangement of that, the field trip that we went on, it was about how does the abiotic determine the biotic? How do the physical characteristics of an environment form the biological arrangements and distribution and whatever.
Yeah, in my non-science mind, okay, let me break that down even more. Like, I watched students paint mushrooms.
Yeah.
Right? Or they were painting this like particular flower, and I think I cut this part out, but you were like, ooh, what is it that you're painting? Do you know what that's actually called? What's the scientific name? And so it's like that helps students to cement it, because they're journaling, but they're not having to write, which can sometimes get a little monotonous. They're coloring, which is fun. Well, they're watercoloring.
Absolutely.
So as science teachers out there, have you ever thought about maybe having your students watercolor?
Why not? So how did you use it in your classroom?
So then the last little bit
behind us here.
Yeah, back here are some more examples. But in my class, we were learning about the Middle Passage, which 1500s into the middle 1800s, and it was African people being taken from Africa and then being used as a slave labor source in the Americas. And so it's kind of like a really heavy and dark topic, and we've been talking about it and researching it. And then I thought, you know what? For like, you know, to differentiate what students can, for them to be able to tell me what they know. Sometimes talking or writing isn't the best way that they can do it.
It's a different type of data point. Right?
Yeah. And so it's like, hey, how about if you watercolor? So for me, it was a little more simple. For all of you social studies teachers out there, maybe you can use watercoloring to have your students illustrate what they know. Show me what you know by painting a picture of it. And as you can see from these examples back here, the students came up with like a whole array of different things. Some of them were very, very basic, including myself, where I painted like the ship, the HMS Brooks, right? And it was just a very basic picture, but for me, I think very concrete like that. But you had other students that you saw in the video just before we're talking now, where they really went deeper in their thoughts and their understandings about what the impact the Middle Passage had on society.
It forced them to think so very deeply and emotionally about it. And that we've had kids say that in both our classes when we did this activity. I also did this in my regular biology class. It forced, when you paint, it is an expression of your emotions, it's an expression of your thoughts. And it forces you to really think those things through. I was utterly impressed with what your kids came up with. How simple this might seem to you, but you know, as a representation of the sheer numbers of people and how they were packed in there.
That was mine.
That
I painted that one.
But it's quote unquote simple, but it's not.
Oh no, that's not mine. Mine's down there.
Okay. So, but I look at that, and that conveys an emotion to me.
Yeah, I mean, look at this one with a slaved person and the Grim Reaper. Ugh. I mean, it's just amazing. Look at the sort of abstract painting of the people laying in the bottom of the ship. Just really, really incredible stuff. So anyway. That's kind of what we had in mind for you guys today was how can you use interdisciplinary, how can you incorporate other disciplines into your classroom?
Curriculum, instruction, and assessment. There's
Absolutely.
a ton of different ways in which you can do that.
Yeah. And
so I used it both as an instructional tool and an assessment tool.
Yeah.
You used it as an assessment tool?
I used it as an assessment tool so that the students can show me visually what they've learned from the content that we've been talking about. Yeah, so you can use it in all different kinds of ways. So give it a try. Maybe just start with art because that's what we've given you for an example. But like, how can you use? I mean, oh my gosh, the options are limitless. How can I use science in a history class? Quick example, we're going to be talking about Arizona's history in copper mining. I would love to take my kids on a field trip out to the Pima mine.
Yep.
talk about the science piece behind that, right? And how that impacted our natural environment here. I mean, the options are limitless. So anyway, give it a try and
take a risk. Take a risk. Take a risk.
We'll see you next week.
Woo-hoo.
Bye.